Well, since we've officially got enough H's to start this, because there's a certain amount we have to have before we begin any video. If a video does not begin with very H, then apparently we cannot do it. We cannot. It is impossible. But Steven Anderson, I haven't covered this guy in a while. And has he done anything new? Hard to say. But I did find a video, just randomly looking around, and it spoke to me. It spoke to me. Okay, it is a recent video, and this video, it explains something that I've been wanting to figure out, and that is, do these people realize what they're doing? And I think the answer in some situations is just a flat out, well, frankly, no. No, they don't know what they're doing. They think that they are righteous people. Now, for people who didn't know already, Steven Anderson is the leader, as it were, of the NIFB, the New Independent Fundamental Baptists. This is a guy who, well, we'll get into it in the video. I don't need to poison that well too terribly much. But I have done videos on him in the past, and one of them got taken down by YouTube for hate speech because apparently YouTube poops are hate speech. Which is just perfect. But all right, Steve, let's hear you. Let's give you some volume. Not that you don't have plenty of that already.
The reason that everybody hates me and has all this stuff on the internet attacking me is because I've stood up for what's right. What did I steal? What have I robbed? Who have I killed? Who have I assaulted?
So, I don't know if Steven understands this. In fact, actually, based on my estimation earlier in the video, I would say that he doesn't understand this. But words have weight. Words have meaning. Words can cause immense harm and immense good. In fact, as a pastor, he should be very aware of the power of words. You can imagine that as somebody who uses the Word of God as a sword, that he should know what words do and how strong and powerful they really, truly are. It's not that Steven has robbed anyone. It's not that Steven has harmed anyone directly, except for himself when he was tased. As funny as that was. No, Steven, it's not that you've harmed people with your physical hands. It's that your actions, which speak louder than your words, but are tangled with your words, have been about killing people. If I were to simply take a look, right, and this is being very slow for some reason, but let's see the things that we can find about Steven Anderson on YouTube. Now, when we do stuff like this, we actually do see that we have to have Encyclopedia Britannica give context about what AIDS is, because, of course, we have Christian pastor calls for killing all gay people. AIDS is the judgment of God from Steven Anderson. The documentary, Steven Anderson, AIDS, the judgment of God. Christian pastor supports killing sodomites, which means gay people. AIDS, the judgment of God, documentary by Pastor Steven Anderson. Hitler pastor on Caitlyn Jenner. He hopes he, which is a misgender, dies today. The American preacher spreading hate. Wow. It is almost as if there is plenty of reason, good sir, to dislike you. It's not about you hurting people with your hands, with your fists. It's not about robbing people. There are people who have done that because of you and have felt emboldened because of you, because you incite violence. But let's continue.
The only reason why there's anything against me is for the words that have come out of my mouth as I preach the Bible.
Amen. So, yes, but your words have weight, and you can't just say something hateful, hurting other people, and then just say it's from the Bible and hide behind it like a shield. That makes you a coward. Now, I know Steven Anderson's a coward because I actually attempted to debate him years ago, back when the Non Sequitur show was still a thing, and this little bitch left me on red. This when I was a tiny ass channel, super easy to cyberbully, wouldn't have taken any time. This dude leaves me on red like a freaking coward. And I understand. You don't have to answer any debate call out. You don't. I don't have to. But when you're somebody who talks a big game about killing people and firing squads, you'd think that maybe you'd be able to back it up a little bit with anything other than a conference you held in Florida celebrating the freaking Pulse nightclub shooting. But
so don't be ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed of you. I love you, and I would claim you as my friend and church member in a heartbeat. You know, when a society begins to just...
Oh, God. He's right. We do live in a society. I had no idea.
Openly accept sodomy, that's when they're like Sodom. That's when you know it's at the very final stage on the downward spiral of the final stages of depravity, when you've got them just proudly just exposing the sin of sodomy. No.
Now, what is sodomy? Let's go ahead and just define that real quick. Sodomy is penetration of the anus. That scientifically, we're going to go with that. Now, according to Anderson, that is a sin, which means we necessarily have to think of what's going on with God. What does God think of this? Because this means that God, effectively, with all of his machinations, with all of his power, decided that when he was deciding where the G-spot should be on men, he should put it somewhere and then immediately argue that no, you should never touch there. That's bad. That's bad. I know the G-spot's in your butt, but don't touch that. That's bad. Don't do that. It's the same logic behind putting the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, in the Garden of Eden, where they're not supposed to be, like, eaten from, but they put it right there in the middle where anybody can see it and eat from it. It's the same logic. The same nightmarishly stupid thinking. And you praise it. No wonder you worship people like Trump. No wonder. Because the only people that Pastor Anderson can respect are people that can't rub two brain cells together for their life. Now, it's not just that. We need to talk about what actually happened in Sodom. Maybe that'd be a good thing to do. Let's contextualize Sodom. Sodom was supposed to be a place where all kinds of sin was happening, not just anal. If I were to actually take the Bible on its word and take it literally, it wasn't just a bunch of people practicing anal that caused Sodom to go away. If anything, it was the fact that people in there were, like, literal rapists. Like, hell, the most moral man in Sodom, apparently, tried to give his daughters away to an angry mob so that they could have sex with them instead of the angels. If anything, it's not anal that Sodom is most guilty of. It's a massive amount of posting horny on Maine. That's effectively the biggest issue of Sodom, is being horny on Maine. Without a license. No, Pastor Anderson, to actually get to his homophobia, he's going to have to go to Leviticus. Because he's not going to get it specifically from Sodom and Gomorrah. But even when you go into Leviticus, the context of the time is that they needed to have people breeding more often because their children were dying. Like, the average age was dropping drastically because people just weren't surviving. You literally were harming your tribe if you were not actively participating in breeding. That's the context of that time. The same reason that the context, like, it's the same thing. Whenever you try to hit these people with, oh, do you eat shellfish? The same context of that time is that the shellfish was actually causing sicknesses. There were parasites in it, and they weren't able to effectively cook it out. Same issue with pork. And so the people were supposed to not eat it. And it was easier to engage in a religious claim about this than it was to try to break things down scientifically without a scientific method or respected experts. The same logic applies when it comes to homosexuality as did with things like shellfish. It is outdated as hell. But he clings to it because what tends to happen is that these pastors and these people are not actually homophobic because the Bible told them to be. Generally speaking, what we see is that they are homophobic, and then they use the Bible to hide behind because it is a convenient shield because they are cowards.
No longer hidden, no longer in the closet, but a coming out of the closet.
Oh, also, there's a point in the chat. Doesn't the original Leviticus translation talk about boy sex slaves? Yes. It depends on how you end up translating it, but it can also mean that it's against pedastry. There's like 6 different translations for it. One of them is that even if granting that it's against homosexuality completely, it is ultimately within the context of the time and not relevant now. But if you don't accept the premise, then there are other translations for it, such as 2 men sleeping together in another woman's bed, basically desecrating her personal space. Or a man taking a male, which was a translation for young boy, into a bed, and therefore committing, essentially, a dirty P word that I don't want to say, else I'll get demonetized. So at the end of the day, there are multiple translations for it, but my point is that even if you grant the premise that it's talking strictly about homophobia or homosexuality, then you don't necessarily come to the conclusion that that means don't practice it today. What that ultimately means is that even granting the premise as far as I can take it, the context of the time does not apply to today.
That's where America is at today. And you know what? You say, well, America wasn't that great 50 years ago or 60 years ago. You know what? I know that there was sin in America 50, 60, 70 years ago, but it wasn't just being openly declared like it is now. That is a new development, okay? That is in literally the last 10 to 15 years. 15 years ago, it was not being declared the way it is today.
So now we effectively have the argument 50 years ago, people weren't declaring it. So really, what this argument boils down to, this is not Steven Anderson saying that America's better because it didn't have gay sex before. It's that he didn't have to see it. It made him uncomfortable. Not only is this man an absolute coward hiding behind his Bible in a desperate attempt to maintain some form of social relevance, he also has to hide behind it because things around him change, and that makes him incredibly uncomfortable. This is the same type of argument as if you had somebody who was seeing a black couple or a mixed race couple, and then they went, 50 years ago, I guess at that point it'd be 70 years ago, it'd be the 1950s, but 70 years ago, you didn't see that. You didn't see that. I didn't have to worry about my daughter coming home with a black man. It's the same thing. That man can't control being black, and your daughter can't control being a lesbian. It is the same line of thinking. The only difference is that we tackled racism first, and then homophobia. So the people who got over their racism are using the exact same logic that made them a racist idiot in order to be a homophobic idiot. And you see this with transphobes too. The same logic that made you a homophobe and the same logic that made you a racist makes you a transphobe as well. This is why, generally speaking, if you find a racist, you're going to find a homophobe, you're going to find a transphobe. You might not necessarily find a homophobe and a transphobe, or you might not necessarily find a homophobe and a racist when you find a transphobe, because socially, that is what we're working on right now. Steven Anderson's effectively been left at the dust at this point. He's not socially relevant as far as his criticisms are concerned. Now, he's got some transphobia, and at least at that point, he's at least more in line with some of the other shit we're dealing with right now. But homophobia is getting increasingly more rare because people are realizing that if Marley and Jim over there peg on Wednesdays, it doesn't matter. It affects your day none. And it offends your God none, either because you believe he doesn't exist, or, more likely, because you believe he's not that petty. And if you do believe your God is that petty, why would you worship someone who is so petty? And yet, many of these people end up being Trump supporters, so I don't know why I ask that question when at least they're being consistent in who they worship.
Not even close. And I'm a young man. I'm 32 years old. Okay, but I
32? This man is 4 years older than me. He's not even a generation older? $32? I doubt that. Okay, he's 39 now. So this is just a repost of something much older. Okay. Okay, if he's 39 now, cool. This is old footage that somebody has reposted on the internet because they wanted it there.
I'm just shocked that the older generation just sits by and lets this happen.
Because the older generation isn't entirely made up of bigots, you tool.
What a disgrace. What a shame. You know who ought to be ashamed of themselves? Gray-haired men who accept all this sodomy and filth, who actually
Have you ever considered that some of those gray-haired men might also be gay? You know, whatever.
lived in this country when it was a clean and normal, somewhat decent place.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do this thing where we move the goalpost, okay? Can we play the move the goalpost game? Is everybody okay? Give me an H in chat if you're okay with us playing the goalpost game for just a little bit with Steven Anderson. While I take a drink. Okay. America was great before this gay marriage came about. I preferred it when it just don't ask, don't tell. But if we go back further, man, it was so much better when it was illegal to be gay. Maybe not necessarily illegal, but nobody batted an eye if you beat them in the street. They deserve it anyway, man. They're gonna go to hell later. You gotta beat some sense into them. Stop them from going there. Man, it's love. Beating them is love. That's what I did my kid. He came back home with Tommy and left with a black eye. That's what you do, man. Okay, let's rewind this back a little more. To show that this America was great at one point argument never fucking holds water. It was great. Things were so much better when you got funny looks for coming home with a black girlfriend. I don't. It's not that I think there's a problem with them, but they just gotta, honestly, they just gotta stick to their own kind. And yet, you can go back even further. It was so much better when they had to drink from different water fountains. I don't like that they pollute my water fountains. Or, go back even further, they need to be in completely different schools. Their skull shapes they are deficient. They don't know what they're doing. Or you could go back even further. These people, they used to be slaves. It was so much better when they were that. Now I gotta pay people to do what I'm trying to do. What is America even coming to? And yet you can go further back, and back, and back, and back, and back, and back, and it never, ever, ever stops. Until you get to before the founding of America, where we're engaging in a revolutionary war, in part, to keep slaves. You can pull this take me back to when America was great argument 1,000 ways. All it is cowardly nostalgia. There's some nostalgia that's fine. If I sit back and go, you know what? I miss the era of collectathon platformers, where that was the norm for video games. Or, a generation later, I miss the era of FPSs. And then, a couple generations later, I miss the era of open world games. Every game was open world. Or the era before that, where every game was getting RPG mechanics. Call of Duty got RPG mechanics. First level up and prestige systems. There's nostalgia for different things. But if the nostalgia is literally, I preferred it when other people had to live in fear, then maybe you're a fucking moron. But let's continue.
And now they just accept all this garbage. I mean, what a shame. What an abomination. I mean, at least I'm just a young man who just inherited this mess. I mean, good night. To sit there as an older man and just be okay with it? I mean, if you're an older man and you're fighting against it and you're standing up against it, praise God for you. But if you're one of these gray-haired people that accepts all this, and look, have you noticed, there aren't even a lot of older people in our church.
Have you imagined it's because many of them have probably already dealt with cults once or twice before and recognized that yours is that, and the only people that you can actually push into are the young and impressionable people that you can get at a ripe young age and actually brainwash and indoctrinate them, leaving you to have a disproportionately young audience in there, not because of the benefits of having a young audience outside of anything aside from the easy access to brainwashing them. Have you ever considered that? Young people are more impressionable, easier to lead. Therefore, it's easier for you to get in their brains, like an abusive predator. Has that not occurred to you, Stephen? I don't even know if it's true that you don't have a lot of old people in your congregation. I'm not even certain. But like with Leviticus, I'm willing to grant your premise and work with it. Assume you're telling the truth as a best case scenario and move on from there. And yet it does not get us to where you want us to go.
Because our church is too old-fashioned for the elderly.
No. It's that you are an energetic bigot, and that energy, blindly or not, many times there are young people who will follow that energy. Not for any good reason. I should know. As somebody who grew up in PCA, as somebody who grew up in a school that was funded and created by the IFB, the old IFB, and the Seventh-day Adventists, I know what it's like to have that infectious church energy. Where that's the reason that we're here. You're not there because of the individual things the pastor's saying. You're there because you want his energy, his passion, his fire. You want that big dick energy, and then you get there and the things you actually hear, and suddenly you're believing them too. Because you were there for the energy. You were there for the passion. Stephen, does it occur to you maybe that you are in fact a type of predator?
I mean, figure that out. I mean, our church is too old-fashioned for the elderly can't handle it. Too old-fashioned. I mean, that's when you know you're old-fashioned.
No, because you would know you're old-fashioned if you couldn't even have the young people in there as well. This logic does not work, Stephen.
You know, we're so old-fashioned that only people in their 20s and 30s can even handle it. How old-fashioned we are.
Yeah, that's because the people who actually lived back in those times and do not want things to return back to those times know better than to believe your dumbass. But the people who are infantilized, who, like your Nicholas Fuentes type people, who will sit there and just idolize the 50s and just go, man, it was such a simpler time. People knew the social order. It was great for me, the token white man. Stephen, you're selling a fantasy, not even your Bible, which I personally believe is your own fantasy. You're not even just selling that fantasy, you're selling a fantasy of an America as well.
Probably 32 minutes into the sermon, 32 Bible verses have come out of my mouth. You know, and there's probably 32 things that will offend the world that we live in today. And tell me, what have I preached that is not biblical? And yet people are ashamed of this kind of preaching. There are some people, not in our church, thank God, that would be ashamed to bring a visitor to a service like this.
So, you could bring a visitor to a service like that and be ashamed, and that would be a perfectly reasonable response, because that visitor may be in the closet. You may realize that, oh, wait, maybe it's when you feel ashamed to bring a visitor to a service like that you realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be here. Stephen, have you considered, just maybe, just possibly, that your hatred and vitriol get mistranslated by younger people as high energy, And so they follow you. They see your charisma insofar as you have it. Rolling natural 20s with a low actual charisma state, it's fine. And they see that and go, oh, that's a guy I want to be behind. And then they end up buying your shit hook, line, and sinker as a result. This is what you do as a cult leader. The NIFB is a cult. It follows all of the common trends of a cult. You can juxtapose it to Stephen Hassan's bite model or Telltale's Fibonacci sequence model. It comes out as a cult at the other end. It is gross. It is disgusting. And if Steven Anderson wants to really know why people hate him, maybe it would be good for him to understand that the things he's saying are hatred. And because he is spewing hatred and saying that it's biblical, whether or not it is, that's why people hate him. Even if we grant that your stuff is completely biblical and 100% true, we naturally end up to the time and place argument. That it's outdated. Because it was made for a different people in a different time. And we can actually, through the study of history, figure out why it was used for those people in the times in which it was used. You're not so old-fashioned that the old people can't handle you. You have a fantasy idea of what old-fashioned is, and you sell it. Because that's how you make your living. You are a cult leader selling the idea of good old-fashioned Southern biblical teaching. It just happens to include a metric fuck ton of hate. And it's gross. But if you guys enjoyed, insofar as I can actually use that word for this video, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Maybe go check out my Patreon if you want to. There's videos over there that show behind-the-scenes stuff of what goes on at the house instead of just the stuff that goes on the channel. So if you want to see all that, then Patreon is where you would see that. If you have the ability to share this with a friend and you think that they would get anything out of this type of presentation, then please do so. And if you want to check out the live streams where these actually happen, then please tune into the channel. Generally speaking, it's going to be around 1 p.m. Eastern almost every day in the week. Usually there's a day or two I take off, but generally speaking, you'll find me at 1 p.m. Eastern over on this channel. So if you enjoy all that stuff, awesome. I'll just say again, hit subscribe, hit like if you haven't already, and thank you all for watching.